The following text and video contain many false and debunked claims on 9/11. I think everybody by now should know that the two towers collapsed because of the impact of two airplanes. All other theories are false and should not be taken seriously by anybody. Other claims of the video can be proven false as fake with a simple Google search. The following video is for entertainment purposes only. It all started 1 year, 1 month, and 1 day before 9/11. During a military training exercise in the Barents Sea, north of Norway, a Oscar II-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, one of the biggest ships of the Russian Navy, was lost. For 5 days, the Russians unsuccessfully attempted to rescue the sub in secret. But Western media swiftly spread the news far and wide. At day 6, Putin gave in to the international pressure and let non-Russian ships attempt to rescue any surviving sailors. But it was already too late. 118 men had already found eternal peace in their metal coffin. The Western media quickly knew what had happened. The Russian arrogance and incompetence were the cause of the accident, as well as the reason why the rescue operation failed so catastrophically. The old boogeyman, the eternal Russian, the gigantic enemy you, your parents and your grandparents used to fear for even before you were born, was no more. Russian submarines, once a symbol of fear and power, now became the icon of failure. But little did anybody know that everything went according to plan. On board of the Kursk were 24 P-700 Granite cruise missiles, made out of extra hardened material that made them, quote, almost impossible to shoot down. These 10 metric ton monsters were designed to precisely hit and penetrate ship-sized objects and deliver high explosive or nuclear payloads through multiple walls straight to the heart of the target for maximum effect. Initial Russian claims that the Kursk sank because it was hit by another submarine were ignored. But Russian claims that there were no nuclear warheads on the ship were regarded as truth. Putin immediately ordered the Kursk to be lifted off the seafloor, but that operation would take years to complete. 1 year, 1 month, and 1 day later, a massive explosion interrupted the peace in Manhattan. Within minutes, media houses received video footage showing a plane crashing into the first tower. 17 minutes later, the second tower was also struck. Air traffic control operators saw that the flying objects flew maneuvers too precise and too rapid for civilian planes, especially flown by unexperienced hijackers. What really happened was that 2 Russian nuclear missiles just had struck American soil. This idea becomes even more evident when looking at the flight path and damage caused at the Pentagon. Experienced pilots could not imitate the supposed flight paths of the airplane, because the target is barely the height of a ship, and normal planes are not designed to fly that close to ground level. But a Russian P-700 Granite cruise missile is. Side note, nuclear missiles have hundreds of strategic locations pre-programmed into them. The Pentagon is likely number 0001 on that list. So, whoever was in control of these nukes did not even have to reprogram them. The staff at the Pentagon was always aware of this fact, as Ground Zero was the name of a small coffee house in the central garden of the Pentagon. Hello, Mr. President. Do not ask how we got this number. Better ask yourself about the live nuclear missile that lies in the heart of your Pentagon. And about the 2 nukes above Manhattan in the Twin Towers. If our demands are not fulfilled within the next 24 hours, we will turn your country into a nuclear wasteland. Facing this loss-loss situation, the president was informed about a barely known secret. The World Trade Center was built during the Cold War. Back then, nuclear weapons did have a positive reputation. The Twin Towers were secretly equipped with civilian emergency thermonuclear devices, capable to turn the buildings to dust. In case a tower was about to fall to the side, the nuke could have been fired to prevent damage to the surrounding area. So, with that in heart, the president ordered for the Twin Towers to be pulled down, as that would prevent rogue missiles from being remotely detonated, while maintaining a somewhat plausible cover story for the spin doctors to work with later. This heroic action saved millions of American lives, and maybe even prevented a nuclear World War III with Russia. The 4th missile, with great luck, was shot down just over Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Just look at the official pictures of the crash site if you need confirmation. Nobody should ever know how vulnerable the United States were at that day. Every civil servant who was seriously involved on 9/11 will take this secret proudly to his grave. The official narrative was a hastily emergency cover-up story. Just pick one guy from the top 10 most wanted list and blame everything onto him. Barely 3 months after 9/11, the United States withdrew from the historic Cold War-era anti-ballistic missile treaty, claiming that, quote from Wikipedia, withdrawal from the treaty was a necessity in order to test and build limited national missile defense to protect the United States from nuclear blackmail by a rogue state. Since then, the US have massively upgraded their missile defense capabilities, but up to 20 nukes from the Kursk are still missing to this day. Oh, and speaking of the Kursk, about 33 days after 9/11, the submarine was raised from the seabed. And of course, the Russians claimed that they sadly had to destroy the cruise missiles on board without showing the world any evidence of that. And that's what's really happened on that historic day. Or did everything in reality go according to plan? Hello and welcome to the Vital Red Pill. Today we shall look at one of the most creative 9/11 threads on 4chan. As for the who dark mysterious attacking force is, I'd say it's not the scope of this video to speculate about that. They could be anybody, and I would also kindly advise you to refrain from any speculations in the comment section, as to stay within YouTube's guidelines as well as German law. Important debunking first. There were no nuclear warheads on the Kursk submarine, and no nukes were used on September 11th. There is no evidence indicating otherwise. Technically speaking, this whole story is just a massive LARP / made up story based on this famous Illuminati card game card. So, the whole story that 4chan author wrote is a fascinating what if that is real scenario, based on cherry-picked data points, false interpretations of real events, and other totally out there fake whistleblower interviews, as well as all conspiracy theory stereotypes. The goal of this video here is only to entertain and nothing else. Now, with all that out of the way, let's read what exactly the author wrote. 9/11 Red Pill Bomb. You will not understand what happened without it. Written by Annon on the 11th of September 2020. Let's see if the mods will intervene in this red pill I've been sitting on for over a decade. A little over 1 year before 9/11 happened, exactly 1 year, 1 month and 1 day apart, an extremely significant event occurred that people have long forgotten.
The Kursk submarine, carrying dozens of Russian sailors, sank while in a military exercise in the Barents Sea. The Kursk was part of a little-known Oscar-class submarine that was the world's biggest sea-launched nuclear cruise missile submarine. On board was 24 P-700 giant cruise missile tubes hardened against the largest explosions in the world for guaranteed delivery. Everyone on board died, and Putin and co. did their best to cover up the reason why they were allowed to die with a stalled rescue effort. On the day of the event, the submarine supposedly contained all of its live nuclear ammunition, a fact relayed to Clinton and the Bush administration by Putin. When did they finally attempt to salvage the submarine and its extremely dangerous missiles? The week after the 9/11 attacks on the United States. I can go into details as to why there were no planes on any of the events in 9/11, but let's just focus on two that you can all agree upon. No plane struck the Pentagon. The angle of approach and the hole left through 6 walls of the Pentagon should not strike anyone as a signature of a plane crash. In fact, a jetliner attempting to strike the ground-level Pentagon would be slowed down to such a point that it would break up into pieces while attempting to strike it. The other event of extreme significance was the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. Supposedly, this was a hijacked plane that crashed on its own, with others stating it was shot down by an F-16. The object was indeed destroyed by a F-16. It was not a plane, however, as you can tell by the complete lack of any kind of debris on the ground. What was the target? Obviously not the White House, or the first missile would have struck there. The target was the Sears Tower in Chicago. This is a critical piece of information that may prove to be important in the future, depending on what the adversaries choose to do. An American annon asks, that guy Lokil Julianus also believes in the nuke theory and has a bunch of sources and studies of cancer rates and tritium found in the surrounding area. Is this a meme? To which OP replies, of course it is not a meme. Believe it or not though, it is not directly related to these cruise missiles. I'll get to that soon. He then continues, the Sears Tower? Are you schizophrenic? How could you possibly know the target? To which he replies, it's a barely kept secret, linking to a story of the Chicago Tribune. With the headline, Sears Tower allegedly was on 9/11 target list. An article from the year 2003. But how do I know for sure the Sears Tower was a target even without this confirmation? This is where we get to the real meat of the situation. On 9/11, straight after World Trade Center 1 and 2 were struck, Number 7 was evacuated in a very public manner, with Giuliani touring New York City. But it was not the only building evacuated. The Sears Tower was also evacuated. He posts a link of the Chicago Sun-Times. The headline reads, "This week in history, terror hits home." When the World Trade Centers fell on September 11, 2001, Chicagoans locked down and exited buildings, unaware if another attack would land. Here's a look at what happened in Chicago and on the ground in New York City. Written in the year 2020. He continues, keep this in mind going forward. Now, the biggest mystery is why the towers had to come down. This is the biggest question people ask. Once they've figured out, everything else goes back to this. Okay, they got their plane attack. Why bring the towers down? It brought the US economic ruin. The plane alone would be enough. It's the target selection that gives away what happens. World Trade Center 1, 2, 7 and the Sears Tower have something in common. They are all steel construction skyscrapers, the likes of which have never been demolished before. There's actually no conventional mechanism for controlled demolition of any of these towers. There is, however, a little-known, patented, unconventional demolition using underground nuclear charges. These towers were built in a time before the public was against the use of nuclear weapons. Believe it or not, These planes were made to pretty much eliminate the chance of contamination of the city where those demolitions take place. Again, there's many sources about this on the internet, and I will come back around and link them, but the main thing is to answer the why, not the how. We still need an answer for why these plans would be triggered at all. He continues. In the minds of most conspiracy theorists, they find it easy to imagine a grand conspiracy involving every branch of government committing such a horrific thing as demolishing not one, but 3 iconic towers belonging to the United States. That would never happen. There would be an immediate leak if such an event were to occur, just on the basis of corrupt evil, especially World Trade Center 7. Which is the building that reveals the ultimate truth, as you will soon see. For things to go down smoothly and without leaks, there must be a proper justification for such a horrific action that US government officials, many of whom are patriots and hardworking people, despite all the memes, could swallow and take to their graves. They would have to believe that the people in New York City were in mortal danger from what happened on 9/11. And that's why we are going to have to go back to the cruise missiles in OP. I'm going to try to convince you that the cruise missiles used on 9/11 were in fact the ones that were meant to be on that submarine. After allegedly salvaging the wreck of the Kursk, Russians claimed that they had to destroy the cruise missiles on board. The missiles were never shown to any independent body, and we only got to see their containers being covered with some kind of yellow foam to protect the damaged missiles. In reality, such an expensive missile, especially with highly enriched uranium and specialized explosives, would never be destroyed, but recycled at the very least. Then he links an article from The Guardian. Kursk successfully raised from Monday the 8th of October 2001. He continues, the Russians and Putin were covering up the theft of those missiles by someone. He then replies to some comments. An American annon claims that he should go back to X. Sorry you lack the attention span, annon. I'm posting this here for the people who have already done the 9/11 investigation themselves, but always miss these blind spots. Another American annon remarks, most large public spaces were evacuated that afternoon. Not sure if people who don't remember it could understand. The entire country turned into an armed camp. Delays at airports after the planes were ordered to land meant that there were many planes in the air for a long time and no one knew if there were more hijackers. To which he replies, that is true, but you have to look at the big picture here, keeping in mind that Sears was revealed to be a target afterwards. He then continues, and posting a picture of the card game Illuminati. The one card is called Terrorist Nuke, and it shows an explosion at one of the 2 World Trade Center towers. And the second card is showing a big explosion at the Pentagon. Those cards were printed before 9/11. He continues. The first hint goes back to the Pentagon. The cruise missile that struck the Pentagon was not immediately shot down. In fact, it could not have been shot down, despite there being a war game at the time, as the missile was flying at supersonic speeds on impact and too low for any defense to do so. You could see it in the one video release from the Pentagon that it was literally skimming a few meters above the grass. The missile managed to penetrate not only the facade, but 6 entire walls of the Pentagon, landing near the Ground Zero area of the Pentagon, the name given to the garden due to the known Soviet doctrine during the Cold War to destroy the Pentagon with a nuclear cruise missile in case of a war. In fact, the trajectory was already programmed onto the missile. For that to happen, you would need a missile that is protected with a hard steel casing that is meant for naval warfare. That's exactly the role that the Granite missile filled. It is the only cruise missile in the Soviet catalog that could possibly survive that kind of collision and continue moving. It is meant to take many hits from missile defense systems before being shot down. So, you have a nuclear cruise missile striking the Pentagon. But it never got destroyed. And Washington DC is still around. What gives? Well, as it happened, as far as we can obviously guess, all of the nuclear fuses on the missiles were removed. Shortly afterwards, the E-4B doomsday plane started to take off, and Dick Cheney, Bush and others, except for Donald Rumsfeld, who was conveniently near the Pentagon at the time, were rushed into the NORAD nuclear bunker facility, whose doors were closed for the first time in history outside of an exercise. What the emergency crew at the Pentagon saw was a nuclear missile sitting in the heart of the capital of the United States. They also knew that the same missiles that struck the Pentagon had just struck the most populated city in the United States and its economic heart. He continues, imagine you're in the shoes of the generals at the Pentagon, knowing there was a chance that a nuclear bomb was now embedded into each of the Twin Towers in New York City. The event went from an attack, in the media a terrorist attack, immediately to nuclear war. But would it be right to take such a drastic action as to demolish a building to neutralize a potentially armed but not detonated nuclear bomb? That's when you come to the second hint, a little-known exercise called Jekyll Cave that took place at the same time as 9/11. The Department of Energy has a special team to deal with exactly these kinds of events, called Nuclear Emergency Search Team, in short NEST. This exercise happened in a joint venture with the UK, which definitely knew about this schedule ahead of time. Naturally, other nations would also have known. During the Cold War, this would have never happened, but it was over. The Department of Energy turned NEST into a more of a smaller civil emergency team. This proved to be catastrophic. The one team that could have been dispatched to potentially disarm the nuclear cruise missiles embedded in the World Trade Center was still in Europe, would take hours and possibly a whole day to fly back home and mobilize. During this time, the enemy could detonate the bombs remotely. Drastic action had to take place to save New York City. On September 11, 9:37 a.m., the US Navy dispatched a yet undisclosed number of Aegis naval combat systems to protect the US coast from seaborne targets. That's right, not hijacked airliners, but seaborne targets. In the meantime, all civilian air traffic was halted, and the F-16s were in the air to fire everything they have at the missile on its way to Chicago. All thanks to God, they nailed it, and the only photograph of the event on the ground shows a large explosion in the air. It was time to deal with the problem in New York City, and what followed has been covered by other annons a million times, so I'll only briefly mention it here. World Trade Center 1 and 2 were destroyed by an underground civilian thermonuclear bomb, which pulverized the entire tower and quite a few surrounding buildings into dust. What you saw all crumbling down in a manner unlike any other conventional explosion was already destroyed by the supersonic mechanical wave vibrating through all the steel in the building. The wavefront was disturbed only by the internally cut/damaged frame where the missiles struck, which is why you only see the top of the tower's remains and nothing but magma-like remains and dust for the rust. The underground area of Ground Zero in New York City was still hot for 100 days. No amount of thermite could do that. If you've been living under a rock for the last decade, you can view the full video by one of the 9/11 suspects, later removed from the FBI list, detailing the nuclear demolition. Then he posts a link to Dmitry Galezov, World Trade Center Nuclear Demolition, Part 1 of 26. The video is called The Third Truth About 9/11. It has 50,000 views right now. Before we move on to finally close the book on World Trade Center 7, we are going to zoom a little bit forward since the focus is on the cruise missiles and the nukes on board. He continues, the final clue comes in the months after 9/11. The Bush administration took an action that surprised the entire world. Bush pulled out of a landmark agreement that helped end the Cold War, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and 9/11 was used as a justification. He links to a New York Times article. Bush pulls out of ABM Treaty. Putin calls move a mistake. Written on December 13, 2001. From that article he quotes, today, as the events of September 11th made all too clear, the greatest threats to both our countries come not from each other, or other big powers in the world, but from terrorists who strike without warning, or rogue states who seek weapons of mass destruction. End quote. It was clear that the US military was now alarmed about how vulnerable the US homeland was to attacks by a rogue party, especially missile-borne attacks carrying nuclear weapons. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty was torn up, and this act officially resumed the Cold War, with Russia quickly working towards its own ABM-breaking solutions. Now seen in the form of the hypersonic missiles and the S-500. Many agree that 9/11 was the starting point of World War III, which is increasingly getting hot. Moving back to World Trade Center 7, let's take a look at the building from the last known footage on the ground. He posts a video called G-Man at World Trade Center 7 was only getting his fair share. He continues, as you can see, there was no evidence of any kind of conventional controlled demolition here. We have to either accept the usual thermite bullshit from Stephen Jones, a nuclear physicist, or the popular mechanics bullshit explanation, the same rag that recently declared that 2 + 2 = 5. Linking in an article from the Popular Mechanics magazine called Why Some People Think 2 + 2 is 5 and Why They're Right. Or, as an alternative number 3, it was an unconventional nuclear demolition, just like World Trade Center 1 and 2. I'll assume you have a brain that you can put 2 and 2 together. Literary. Final post coming. He continues, the demolition of World Trade Center 7 happened many hours after World Trade Center 1 and 2, so it was clearly not an emergency, unlike those two. And yet, this demolition exposed 9/11 for me personally, as it made no sense at all. No plane hit it, it wasn't structurally damaged, and it made zero sense for as a planned. The BBC even fucked up and declared it demolished before it actually got demolished, proving British intelligence knew what was going on as well. It was clearly an oversight. Whatever underground infrastructure, some kind of railway running towards the zero box below the towers, was used to deliver the nuclear charges to the two towers, part of it must have been underneath World Trade Center 7 for the same reason. Meaning the same mechanism that was responsible for the controlled demolition of World Trade Center 1 and 2, something similar also had to be present below World Trade Center 7. He continues, the people involved likely had no malice in this action, but wanted to make sure the attack on the US was deeply held under wraps. Only a few people knew who the attackers are and what their demands were. Those in the know also knew that they still held 18 to 20 Granite missiles that they could launch at the US with a so far 75% success rate. Maybe next time they wouldn't remove the fuses either. A few months later, a general in the Pentagon receives a letter detailing 7 countries the US had to attack in the next few years. Linking a YouTube video called Wesley Clark Reveals Middle East Invasion Was Pre-Planned and Iran is Next. It's from an interview of the year 2007. He continues, many years have passed, and the US anti-ballistic missile system is better tested and has excellent coverage of the US homeland. Though the threat is known and can be dealt with, A new threat will soon emerge.
Then the author falls back to some anti-Semitic typical right-wing conspiracy theories that I have to distance myself from. He says that all the 7 countries who were attacked are the enemies of Israel, and the only one that has not been attacked yet is Iran. This is a typical anti-Semitic talking point, I think. He then continues and uses the conspiracy theory that a nuclear bomb, was used in Beirut, the big explosion in 2020. And he claims that a certain secret service might do the same in the US soon, which is of course a totally crazy anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that I distance myself from.
9/11 Part 2 coming soon. The end. A Russian annon remarks, "It was an unconventional nuclear explosion, just like World Trade Center 1 and 2. He says, I go with the dustification theory, with usage of exotic psychic weapons. To which OP replied, Judy Wood, the lady who is promoting the dustification theory and that exotic weapons were used who just pulverized the whole 2 towers in mid-air. He says, Judy Wood is a psychopathic lady inventing non-existent weapons to divert attention away from the facts that cannot be avoided. These shills also regularly shitpost that nukes don't exist as the new flat earth meme. There is reason behind these moves, so that you won't act to stop their next nuclear 9/11. 2001 was just a rehearsal." An American anon asks, "Part 2 coming soon? How soon?" To which he replies, "I will be posting about it as soon as the other side makes their moves, so that they don't figure out a way to poison the well." I literally mean Part 2 in that the US is going to be attacked again. Soon, by the way. And I'm not going to use a trip code like most people here. The post will stand or fall on its own merit, like God intended. Wow, what a wild ride, right? I checked the sources the author provided, one of which is a massive 1,000-page long book filled with facts. According to those, this is what really happened related to 9/11. The story I had dramatized in the intro was what really had happened. But that truth is only known to the highest levels of the secret agencies. Then there was a cover story for all the congressmen and other curious VIPs. The cover story included the other fun toys of the decade. Soviet-built briefcase mini nuclear bombs. 3 of them to be precise. 1 for each tower of the World Trade Center. And it was nobody else than Osama bin Laden himself who planted these bombs there, either beforehand, using agents, or directly via the airplanes. And that's also why the fear of dirty nukes and terrorists acquiring nuclear material was spread so widely by all the news agencies in the years after 9/11. Let me use an analogy here. The Tooth Fairy, that's something only children believe in. Here, that would be the official narrative. Then, that the Tooth Fairy is not real, that's the mini-nuke story. It is a precisely designed cover-up for the middle to higher class agents and governmental stuff. Then the deep-rooted secret that the Tooth Fairy myth and society enforcement of that meme is an elaborate trauma-based mind control mechanism designed to weaken the trust between parents and children by encouraging the parents to blatantly lie to their own children in a time period when the children have zero mental defenses against manipulation schemes. When later a child finds out that the Tooth Fairy is not real and that their parents blatantly lie to them for what feels like half of their whole lifetime, then the damage is done. The trust is eradicated. The trust is broken. In a sense, the Tooth Fairy is a demonic mind virus with the goal of weakening the bond between parents and children, weakening the family. And that high-level understanding of the events of 9/11 is only present in the highest levels. At least that is what the schizophrenic sources claim. While in reality, of course, everybody knows that it were aliens from the Orion constellation who attacked Earth that day because their previous mischievous plan to destroy Earth using the Year 2K bug had failed. The Kursk was, technically speaking, lifted not exactly 33 days after 9/11, but 34. But time zones maybe allow for a little rounding error. There's a good documentary on the whole salvage operation. Dutch specialists had to create a custom-made crane-barred ship, test new materials, as well as write off a lot of custom software. They succeeded in record time that nobody thought would be possible. The original estimates were that they need at least 3 years to finish this operation, but they did it in only 1 year. As for the who dark mysterious attacking force is, I'd say it's not the scope of this video to speculate about that. They could be anybody, and I would also kindly advise you to refrain from any speculations in the comment section, as to stay within YouTube's guidelines as well as German law. For the theory presented speaks the fact that the attack site was named Ground Zero. According to Wikipedia, Ground Zero is the initial impact zone of a nuclear attack. That's one of the definitions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 2001 was the first time the term Ground Zero was used in a prominent way. The fact that the whole zone was given such an unusual name quickly after events is quite strange, especially as rescue workers used the phrase the pile. But maybe it's just my German non-native speaker's point of view. Conspiratorially speaking, it would be a type of karmic relief operation to use this name in front of the whole world. A type of, look, the truth was in front of your eyes the whole time. Whoever did the attacks had insight into the deeper aspects of the American military, as they chose the moment where the US would be the most vulnerable. How else can it be explained that the 9/11 attacks happened during a military training exercise? A military training exercise that simulated planes being taken over by terrorists. I'm not making this up. And also many other very strange circumstances combined on that one day. Check out these videos by the Corbett Report if you don't know what I'm talking about. Other related questions are, if nukes were used, then why is there no increased radiation in Manhattan? And also, why was there no flash and other elements we were conditioned to expect from a nuclear explosion? The answer is simple. The 150 megaton nukes were fired deep underground, 77 meters below ground to be precise. That's about 250 feet for you Americans. Thus, no flash was visible, of course, and most of the radiation was absorbed by the surrounding granite and rock. Do you remember how the site was very hot for many months afterwards? That workers stated that they had to change shoes after every shift because the soles had melted? An underground explosion creates a well-isolated cavern underground. So the massive heat that is created has little surface area to dissipate. It takes a whole year for such a place to cool down. Of course, that's only just a conspiracy theory. In reality, hot underground fires were raging on for months. Another annon in a recent thread also stated the simple fact that currently both X-tower sites are covered by huge fountains. This could indicate that there is a radiation shield below them, shielding the surface from all the radiation from the nuclear site, and the water is used to dissipate the created heat. Oh, and radiation was present at Ground Zero. Many workers have developed cancers, but of course these cancers were caused by, let me look. Asbestos dust in the air. Speaking of dust, imagine a high-rise building, multiple super megatons heavy, collapsing under its own weight, thousands of tons of material crashing into each other at high speed, pancaking the whole building. How would the resulting dust be? Hot or cold? If you thought it would be hot, then you are crazy, as the dust was cold on 9/11. As do you remember all the pictures of the people completely covered in dust? Yes, none of them got any burn marks at all. As for why there were nukes under the towers, the reason is the building code of New York from the 1960s. If you construct something, you also have to show to the city how you could be able to deconstruct it. Because metal frame high-rise buildings were not really possible to demolish in the 1960s. That's why the manufacturer had chosen the path of the nukes. Back then, nukes were super cool, hip, high-tech stuff, just like Tesla cars and AI today. For example, in the 1960s, the Russians used nukes to extinguish oil field fires. Link to a very old Soviet documentary about that in the description. There was a peaceful civilian nuclear explosion treaty between the US and Russia. According to some sources, that treaty was the reason why some Russian agents, high-level agents, knew what really had happened on that day. And another fun fact, the maximum allowed power of a nuke under the treaty was 150 megatons. Just enough to destroy 90% of the Twin Towers, according to some sources. Another common question is, where did all the rubble go? There should have been much more of it. One answer, it fell into the hole that the nuke created. And another answer, the nukes did dustify 90% of the tower, so most of it was carried away by the wind. A related fact, the workers on Ground Zero were surprised that they did not find any intact tables, chairs, telephones, or any other objects, or even human remains. In the rubble, the most one guy had found was a half of an old phone dial disc. That's half the size of a CD for the young ones. It was as if everything, every single object, had turned to dust. And another interesting fact I had not mentioned in the intro was the timing of the events. Supposedly, 2 nukes had hit the 2 towers. The Pentagon was hit afterwards. Barely 22 minutes later, the first tower collapsed, despite being the second one to being hit. So that, according to this conspiracy theory, really happened was this. Mr. President, we have checked the damage in the Pentagon. It is a flippin' Russian nuke. It's live and active. This means that those bad guys were really not bluffing. We think that the Twin Towers were also hit by nukes. We suggest to pull the towers to prevent catastrophic damage in New York. This can be done quickly. I have the guy in charge on the phone. Mr. President, you have to act quickly and make a decision. Okay, do it. If that's what really happened, then the decision was felt within minutes or even seconds. Now, what would have happened if there were really indeed 500 kiloton nukes in both of the towers? Each one of them has double or triple the explosive power of the World War II ending Hiroshima bombs. According to the site Nuke Map, over 2 million people would have died. So the potential of the threat was gigantic. I will lose 2 or 3 towers and thousands of lives, or gamble that the attacking force that has just sent a live nuclear missile to the heart of the Pentagon was bluffing and do nothing. Especially regarding the fact that it must have been clear to some that there had to be inside involvement in this whole attack. To use a comic term, Hydra had infiltrated the United States government, and this attack was used to gain even more power. Whoever really did 9/11 had massive balls. I gotta give them that. And coal dust creating month-long underground fires is not the only anomaly of 9/11. Plane turbines, when activated, are very strong. They can push away trucks and buses with the air they move. There are many videos of that online. But on 9/11, the planes did not disturb the air at all. There were no vortexes caused by the fast-flying planes. Instead, they only caused explosions that look like fresh out of a Hollywood movie. Explosions that look exactly like all the movies conditioned us explosions should look like. All the videos mentioned in this video can be found as links in the description of the video, as well as on my new video archiving Odyssey/library channel. Also, World Trade Center 7 collapsed around 7 hours after both of the towers. Everybody was so shocked of the collapse of the 2 towers that this tower number 7 was barely noticed at all. Also, I did not know that World Trade Center 7 was rebuilt. It opened just a few years later. And on half of the previous year area, there is a small garden with a water fountain in the center. I also asked Kay if it would have been technically possible to salvage missiles in 350 feet/100 meter depth. The overall consensus was that it could have been technically possible, but not without getting detected by the Russian Navy that was constantly monitoring the crash site. So, in this regard, our peace theory is possible, but not really plausible. Unless Key individuals were bribed. And bribes in the early 90s Russia did not have to be particularly big, as the post-Soviet economy was very, very weak. A theoretical counter-argument to that would be that the United States Army has learned from the mistakes of Project Azorian, also known as the Huge Glomar Explorer story. In the year 1986, a Russian submarine sank in the Pacific Ocean. The sub was armed with the latest nuclear missile technology. The United States wanted to salvage the wreck. The only problem was that the sub was about 3 miles below sea level, or about 5 kilometers. The idea was to construct the ship with special equipment so that it might be able to lift the sub off the seafloor. As that would definitely gather the attention of the Russians, a cover story was created. The US millionaire Howard Hughes was asked to pretend as if he had the idea to be searching for deep sea resources, especially manganese. The Huge Glomar Explorer psyop/cover-up was a massive one. Whole documentaries were produced showing how important deep sea mining could be in the future. Schools were giving reading materials on the topic. Informational posters showing the ship were put on walls in many school classrooms all over the United States. It was a gigantic cover story. There are many documentaries and books on this whole thing. The relevant idea here for the topic at hand is that the operation, according to official reports, had failed. The Russian sub broke into pieces during the lifting procedure. 1968 is a long time ago. It is very plausible, in my point of view, to assume that the US would have learned from that operation's mistake and would have created a more sophisticated means of deep-sea submarine retrieval technology. Maybe a super stealth submarine salvaging submarine, like an underwater Glomar Explorer. Not only to steal secrets from other nations, but also to salvage sunken Western submarines before other rogue nations get their hand on them. Before other rivaling nations get their hands on them. So, maybe this type of technology was used in this case. As for the media impact of this whole story, I remember the news reporting from the Kursk sinking when I was a child. In the German news, it was one of the top stories for weeks. First, that the submarine had sunk. Then that there were still sailors on board who could have survived. I remember a famous report that divers had heard knocks coming from the sub. And the constant criticism towards the Russian government, of course. That their attempt to secrecy had cost the lives of all the sailors. I googled top news of the year 2000 in German, and this was a thumbnail of one of the Year in Review TV shows. My point is simply that the Kursk was huge news in Germany, and that's also the reason why this whole story resonates so much with me. The final public humiliation and destruction of one of West's big bad guy, just 1 year, 1 month and 1 day before the next big bad guy would fill that spot. But hey, that's all just a theory, a conspiracy theory. If you liked what you saw and want more of that, consider supporting this channel, link in the description. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video for the glory of the algorithm. And, as always, find your life's path and take action. Vital Red Pill out.